Welcome to the Thinklings podcast, a conversation where good thoughts help renew the mind with the Word of God. I'm Charlie Carter, and I'm here with Tim Little and Andy Stearns. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to a special edition of the Thinklings podcast. Specifically, and we normally don't say the day, but we are going to say the day, for November 29th. And that day is significant for a couple of reasons. One, that is C.S. Lewis's birthday. And in honor of his birthday, it's also now a quote-unquote holiday. It's a C.S. Lewis reading day. And a lot of C.S. Lewis fans and students are doing things today on different podcasts and social media accounts in memorandum of Lewis and of his works, trying to encourage other people to read him. And so here we are, the Thinklings, and we have a special C.S. Lewis episode.
Yay.
Yay! And so Tim doesn't really know what we're going to do in this episode, but I do, which is usually a recipe for disaster. But we'll see what we can do here. So I have a little intro blurb we're going to do. We're going to talk about Lewis as an author. And then we're going to have a couple of Lewis activities, we'll call them. So first, this is just a random Google search. And I wanted to know, where does Lewis rank with book selling? So I just Googled best-selling books of all time. And we're going to see if Tim can pick any of these out. So Lewis is on this list that I pulled up. This was the first, if you Googled it and you click the first thing that came up, and if you scroll down through it.
Should I Google it real quick?
No. Don't. So there are some things on here that you will be able to guess.
Okay.
So we're going to see how well Tim can do.
Oh boy.
So if you had to throw some titles out here, best-selling books of all time.
Probably Screw Tape Letters.
Oh, okay. Just to clarify, and that's not on here. This is all books, not just Lewis books.
Oh, okay.
But Screw Tape Letters is not on here.
Oh, okay.
So just think, like, if you had to say, what's the number one selling book of all time?
Well, the Bible.
Boom, you got it. That's number one. And they have estimated it here as 5 billion, with a B, copies sold. So similar to that, as you go down the list, what would be some other things similar to it that might be in high regard?
What, like the New Testament? Do they make a distinction?
No, they don't make a distinction within the Bible.
Okay.
But without it.
Pilgrim's Progress?
No, that is not on here.
Oh.
So other spiritual books.
You need Andy here for this type of a thing, not me.
So not non-Christian.
Non-Christian?
Yeah.
Oh, so like the Quran?
Quran is number 2.
Okay.
With 3 billion copies sold, apparently. And then all the way down at number 9, another American religion that thinks they're Christian, but not really.
What, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or something?
Bing, bing, bing. There it is. So number 9 is the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
With 150 million. So not B anymore. There's a couple things on here that I've never heard of. So I'll just go through the list. So the Little Red Book, Quotations from Chairman Mao. No idea. Might have to look into that. 900 million.
Wow.
So that's big. Don Quixote, which is a classic, 500 million. So similar to number 3, selected articles of Chairman Mao. So don't know who Chairman Mao is. Maybe I'm just an urban blockhead for not knowing that.
Yeah, I don't know either.
450 million. A very popular one. Tale of Two Cities, 200 million. Number 7. One of your favorites.
One of my favorites?
Yep, and it is a trilogy. Which I guess this is supposed to be individual books.
Oh, but they did a trilogy here?
Well, they didn't specify.
I don't know. Lord of the Rings would be the only trilogy.
There it is. Number 7, Lord of the Rings. C.S. Lewis's buddy, J.R.R. Tolkien, 150 million. Okay. As we keep going, Scouting for Boys, an Introduction into Good Citizenship, 150 million. Yep. We did number 9, Book of Mormon. 10 was The Little Prince. Actually, I have a cousin who was adapting this into a play, and I don't remember the update of that. But Aaron, if you're listening to this, we'd love to hear the update on that. I think it was either a COVID casualty or it's already happened. I can't remember. But The Little Prince, 140 million. The next one, another recent fiction, very popular series.
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is number 11, 120 million. The Truth That Leads to Eternal Life, they don't have an author, 107 million. Alice in Wonderland, 100 million.
Wow.
At 13, 14, Dream of the Red Chamber, 100 million. And then number 15, it's a single title by
C.S. Lewis.
By C.S. Lewis.
Oh.
And that is
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe at 85 million.
Okay.
Whew. So he's up there. And I was just curious.
Sure.
As far as...
Are any of his other titles on the list?
It stops at 15.
Oh, okay.
So I was curious, though, like, where does he rank?
Yeah.
So I went to Wikipedia. And it's hard to tell who's pulling these lists. I feel like I'm about to sneeze, too, so pause. Maybe I'm going to sneeze. No, we're good. Okay, so it's hard to track down numbers because you're just wondering, like,
oh yeah,
some of the sites are only UK sales or only American sales,
right.
And da 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 da. For example, we just read in this other list that he sold approximately 85 million copies of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. On Wikipedia's page, list of best-selling books, there is a list of best-selling individual books. They have more than 100 million, which they have Tale of Two Cities, which we mentioned before, The Little Prince, Harry Potter, and then there were none by Agatha Christie that wasn't on the other list. But if it did have 100 million, it would outrank C.S. Lewis's 85.
Well, I'd probably trust Wikipedia.
Yeah. And then there's The Dream of the Red Chamber. Never heard of it. The Hobbit is on here.
Oh.
But then between 50 and a million copies, we have a lot of things in the 80 to 50 million range. If C.S. Lewis had sold 85 million, he should be in this list. He's not.
Okay.
He is down here somewhere. I had to, Control F and search his name to find it, but he is on here. And so it's a little hard, but I don't think any of his other books were as high of a seller as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Sure, I would expect that one to be his highest selling. So
that leads me to Lewis activity. I guess this is number 2 because we already did number 1 where we looked at his. We went through the list. So we're going to have a draft, Tim.
Oh, boy.
And we're each going to get 3 picks. And you have to pick, like, your number one. Like, we're going to treat it like it's football or basketball where who's the number 1 overall pick, and then the other person gets to pick.
I'm really bad at sports, especially in the draft.
That's not true. Tim was a very good fantasy football player back in the day. And so it's arbitrary, but you get to make your pick, and then you get to tell us why that's your number 1.
So I get 3.
Yeah. So, and I'll give you the benefit of the number 1 pick, but you get to pick a single Lewis title.
Okay.
You're building a team.
Sure.
And we could do basketball. We could have 5, but
yeah, no, let's do 3.
We're gonna do 3. A little bit more time conscience.
If you pick one of mine, then I got to pick a different one. Is that the way it works?
If you pick one, I can't pick it.
Sure.
So individual titles of within Narnia are all on the table, as well as any of his fiction or nonfiction works. If they're bound in one single bind, you can claim them. So, Tim, you get the number 1 overall pick. And again, I'm just gonna talk a little bit more to give him time to think.
I won't take your first one. He'll be okay.
Because I didn't prep Tim at all.
I got this.
You got it? Okay, number 1 overall pick.
Number 1 overall pick. The book that I cut my Lewis teeth on, The Abolition of Man.
Ooh.
Be my number 1 pick.
Why is that the number 1 overall pick?
The urban blockhead. Irrigating deserts instead of chopping down forests. The cultivation of the affections. So the abolition of man and the idea of affections has significantly shaped my discipleship methodology and even my love for poetry in Hebrew and the Old Testament. So I wouldn't say that that Lewis was the one that introduced me to all of that. I think I actually got it through a study of poetry and Hebrew poetry. But Lewis and Jonathan Edwards and this idea of the affections was already kind of rumbling around in my mind from studies, and it just kind of connected with the biblical truth concerning the fear of the Lord. So Abolition of Man, chapter 1, particularly in the cultivation of the affections.
Yeah, I did not think that was where you were going to go.
Yeah, number 1 overall pick was probably like somebody else's, 4th round pick number 27 or something.
So here's why I think that's a sneaky good pick. Because it is an essay that if you wanted the same idea, it's sprinkled all over Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And you could even get a fiction that talks about it. You could read...
Screw Tape Letters.
Screw Tape. You could read That Hideous Strength. Mm-hmm. And those elements are all... So you're doing exactly what I would think is the Abolition of Man is distilled. It's all really focused and maybe not as accessible as the story would be, but it's all right there in a very short, accessible little essay. 3 essays. But so that's a good pick. I like that. So I have two desires battling within me. Well,
I'm guessing Abolition of Man was not one of your picks at all. So
it might have been. It might have been.
Way to be gracious with me. Appreciate that.
So I know what everyone wants me to do.
Oh yeah, of course. Just say it.
And I'm trying to think, is there anything that justifies not picking that?
No, you have to say it.
Yeah, okay. You have to take The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, I knew that would be yours.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to take it because, it was good, but it wasn't my number 1.
It's if I'm going Lewis's fiction, it's up there with a close tie to one other thing. So why The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is so good?
Yeah.
It introduces you to another world that you kind of already know as a Christian, but you get to know it in a vastly different way. And I still think, and this is where I'm a little bit unique in the sense of I'm a little bit late to the Christian party. I was 16, and I don't think I'd heard of C.S. Lewis until I got to college. I think I've said this on the podcast before. My first interaction with C.S. Lewis was at the old coffee shop in Williamsburg, not the great Brick House Coffee Co., but the Java House. What? No, not the Java House. Java Lounge. There's one in Iowa City that's the Java House, and then there's one that was the Java Lounge, and now it's a Mexican restaurant.
Sounded sketchy.
Yeah, and so, but there was a TV in the corner of the Java Lounge's little shop. Is a little tiny tube TV up in the top corner.
Yep.
And there was one day I was in there with some friends, and there was a movie playing on that TV, and it was the most recent adaptation, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it was the scene where there's the battle and there's all the animals coming across and there's the witch, and you're like, what in the... And if you have no idea what that is, you're like, what in the world is that?
Right.
And I remember one of my buddies at the table, that's the movie Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis. And I'm like, I don't know who that is. And, fast forward to college or seminary when I took Thinklings Stern's Lewis class where we explore Lewis, and I had never really read him. And I still think one of the more powerful pictures in all of his books is when Lucy and Susan follow Aslan to the stone table where he dies in Peter's place. Or not Peter, Edmund. And really, it's a picture of Christ's death for all, but he dies to pay for the to avenge or pay for the betrayer, the treason. And they watch him get ridiculed and mocked and killed, and then they watch the sun come up and he raises. And obviously, well before reading that, I believed in the resurrection. That you can't not believe and be a Christian. So I've already believed in Christ coming back from the dead. But that excites the imagination of the resurrection in a way that my affections hadn't been stirred that way. And to this day, whenever I read that path, and I think rightfully so as a Christian, when you read a very well-written picture of the resurrection, it should stir you.
Yeah.
But still, I think that picture at that point in that story is so powerful. And all the other parts of it too, where, at the beginning you hear about Aslan, you don't know who he is. And then you meet Aslan. And then you realize Aslan's going to die for him. And I just wonder, as a child who doesn't understand the gospel, what that does in the mind and heart of a young child. And I think it's just beautiful, because they're going to find themselves wanting that deeply to be true, and maybe not sure it actually is. And then they go to the Bible and they find out that it is. And so it's just, I think that picture in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is better than any other attempt he makes in any of his other fiction works. It's a core central truth of the gospel that he gets done really well. And he kind of whiffs on some other things in his Narnia series. As I'm listening through The Last Battle right now, I'm reminded that he whiffs on some other things. But anyway, so number 2 pick, my first pick, I'll take The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the gospel truths that he imaginatively depicts for us.
Beautiful.
So back to you, Tim.
All right.
Second, it's the third overall pick. Your number 2 pick.
My number 2 pick is Four Loves.
Ooh, that is not what I thought you were going to say.
I am glad I could be unpredictable. I should have had you write down what you thought I was going to put down, because that would be an interesting conversation.
If I don't pick it, I'm pretty sure it'll be your number 3.
Well, I know what my number 3 is, and I don't think you're going to guess that one at all. But anyway, so my number 2 would be The Four Loves, because of the focus on brotherhood. I don't like his Eros chapter. I think he's off. Okay, but the connection to charity and how charity is a foundational gift, the love of God as being the supreme love above all other loves. You cannot love somebody else. If you place a love higher than God, then it becomes a vice. And then really his chapter, if you only read his chapter on friendship, I think that you would be well served by that chapter and by that book. It would be worth reading just that chapter. So Four Loves is going to be my number 3 overall pick. And I really enjoyed working through that one together with you guys on the podcast. It was a good study and really connected a lot of what we're trying to do as a podcast and what we're trying to encourage among our listeners.
Yeah, it is well, this is going to let the cat out of the bag a little bit. We're going to get to a point here where I was going to ask you, what are some of your favorite Lewis quotes, if you can pull them up? And the little knots of friends who turn their backs on the world are the ones that really transform it.
Yep.
One of my favorites. And where I first heard that was on a podcast talking about the Inklings. And not a friend of the podcast yet, but maybe someday, Malcolm Geit. I would love to have him on the podcast. He's a great poet as well. So I think you would appreciate that about him. But I remember, and again, as someone who's fairly new to what this all was, I remember I was speaking at a camp. And I think it was when I was taking the C.S. Lewis course, and I wasn't really familiar with a lot of these finer details. And so I was just trying to consume as much long form content on Lewis and Tolkien and their relationship as I could, and stumbled upon this podcast where he's talking about, who were the Inklings. And it was just, before our podcast.
Right.
So it was one of the quotes in the seedbed of our podcast.
Well, I didn't even know about it until you guys brought it up. I'm the latest. What? I'm the late bloomer
to C.S. Lewis.
To C.S. Lewis. Yeah. I mean, Andy taught his class, so he was kind of like the grandfather of it all. And then you took his class. I never had a class or whatever. I just have read on my own.
Yeah.
And I didn't begin until my 30s, probably mid-30s, when I first read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I never read them until, my 30s.
Yeah, well, it very similar to me, my late 20s. And anyway, so we'll go with the next pick. And now I have to get back into my mind. What was I going to pick?
Oh boy.
So it comes down to two things for me. And I'm fairly confident. Not fairly confident.
Pretty sure that you won't pick mine.
I think that what I want to pick, you might pick.
Yeah, whatever.
But I'm not going to pick what I want to pick. I'm going to go
pick what you want to pick. I'm not going to pick it.
I think number 2 is I'm going to pick The Great Divorce.
Okay. I definitely was not going to pick that.
So and the reason why, again, it's a fiction work that really depicts some things imaginatively and I think geniusly. And if you've never read The Great Divorce, I'm going to give a snapshot. Guy is in hell. He gets on a bus, goes to heaven. And there's a lot of people that got on that bus from hell with him. And they're all trying to get up into the mountains of heaven. And there are people that they knew in their physical living life trying to help them get actually to heaven. And they all are coming up with reasons why they don't want to go. And some people just hate it because it's like, well, he's teaching that people go to hell and then they get a second chance. No.
It's a dream.
He's not. Well, that's the
cop-out at the end.
Yep. David Downing, who we've had on our podcast, he says this. He's like, you just have to read the subheading. It's a guy having a dream. And he's not trying to tell you what's true explicitly. He's trying to get you to think about what's true imaginatively. And again, that's why I think Lewis is just such is a powerful writer, because he does get you to think about things in a very unique way. And there are different reasons, different excuses that people come up with about why they're not going to get to heaven or why they're not going to go to heaven. And it's just a really interesting, thought-provoking, shorter fiction work. And I don't think any, other than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as far as thought-provoking about something that I'm pretty convinced of theologically, about how people go to heaven, I don't think any other of Lewis's works has caused me to think and ponder a specific point of theology like The Great Divorce had. And so for that, I think it was worth, it made the list for me. I think it's up there. And if you don't pick, I have a title in my mind right now, and if you don't pick it, I'm going to come back to it and say, here's why I didn't pick it, because it's similar to Great Divorce, but different. But anyway, that's my pick. Great Divorce.
Yeah, it's Screwtape Letters.
Is that what you're going to pick?
No, but it needs to be on the list. So since I know that you're going to pick it for your third one, even though I don't know if you should, because then you would have picked 3 fictional books.
No, I'm not going to pick it for my third one.
You won't?
No.
Well, I do like Screwtape Letters. That one should probably be my third, but I'm not going to.
Do it. You got to make a pick.
I'm going to make a pick. So I'm going to pick a Lewis title. I am going to pick fictional. I am going to go fictional on the third one. Okay. And a Lewis title that was very helpful for me in the composition of my dissertation. Are you with me?
I think so.
You know what it is?
Is it the second part of a series?
Yeah, it is. So Paralandra.
Yes.
I'm going to pick for my third pick, which I'm probably going to make a lot of people angry about, because Mere Christianity is not on our list, and neither is Screwtape Letters, which would be great titles.
I still have a pick.
I know. I don't know what you're going to pick, but it probably should not be fiction, since you picked fiction for your first 2.
Hey.
Just my feedback there. But Paralandra really it has a very artistic depiction of an individual. It's fictional, but an individual's impact by by Satan. That's the picture of Paralandra. And then even just his attempt to recreate like the Garden of Eden and the temptation of Eve. And then finally also just his idea of nakedness without shame that he seeks to portray. I thought were very well done. And anyway, it was a book I got in trouble for quoting it in my dissertation. And so I have a long history with that book. And
you got in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, you can't cite a
fiction work.
fictional work in your dissertation. I used it as an illustration.
Which
and
you
he's like,
did.
no. And then we had in my oral defense, we had a bit of a conversation about it. And then the one guy said, maybe you just stick it in a footnote. Because I was being pretty insistent about it. And so was my one dissertation reviewer. Yeah, and he didn't want it.
That is fascinating.
He didn't want it in the dissertation. And so I relegated it to a footnote.
Very good. I like that pick. And that is what I thought. I thought for sure when I conceived of this idea in my mind, I was like, Paralandra has to make Tim's list. I don't know where it'll be, but I almost thought you'd pick it number 2.
No, why pick it number 2? I know you're not going to pick it.
Well, you know I'm not going to pick it because if I was going to pick a work of the Ransom or Space Trilogy.
Yeah, you'd pick Hideous Strength.
Well, okay, it depends on what criteria I would be picking. If I'm picking like my personal favorite, I actually like Out of the Silent Planet. Right. It's preference. I like that one the best.
Mm-hmm.
I like I like the Sorns.
Oh yeah.
The Saroni. I like the big or the little Fiffle Triggy. I like
brother.
I like the Hrasa. Like I like the pioneering aspect of you're on a planet, you're learning about a new world.
Okay, so what's your real pick?
So here's number 2 was, what did I pick for number 2?
You did Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then fictional again, Great Divorce.
Oh, The Great Divorce. Thank you. So I am not going to pick fictional. Screw Tape Letters. A lot of people are going to be like, why wasn't that picked?
It should be on the list. It's a great one.
It is, but...
In fact, it'd be interesting in your list, what was his most sold nonfiction work? I'm guessing Screw Tape or Mere Christianity, but yeah. I would put Screw Tape above it, probably.
And so...
Even though Screw Tape is fiction, so that doesn't really apply.
Yeah.
But it's a weird fiction. It shouldn't be fiction.
I will give Screw Tape Letters this... I like it for this reason. It made me try to create something like it. It spurred creativity in me in a very similar way. So here you have demons trying to talk about how do you get the Christian to fall into temptation and how do we mix him up. I thought it'd be really interesting, a creative endeavor, to look at the fall of Satan like from the opposite way. Like you have in the Gospels, you have the temptation of Christ. And so I did write a little short story, The Temptation of Satan, where he's in heaven and other angels are trying to get him to obey. And like Christ, he cites his reason, like, no, don't you know this? And he's like giving reasons for why he has to disobey the Lord, which is, obviously wonky, backwards, never happened, but imaginatively thinking about something in a very Lewisy way, it's not good. So that's why you've never heard about it. You'll probably never see it. But anyway, my pick, you've already mentioned it. I think it is, in our vernacular, Mere Christianity. I think, The Broadcast Talks.
Yep.
And that is a book, again, that I had heard the title, Mere Christianity. I had never read it, and that was required reading for Andy's class. And I thought it's just a very solid, philosophically minded work on Christianity and aspects of the Christian life. And, apologetics is definitely not my cup of tea. And, but I found that very intriguing and helpful. And I think the way he postures his apologetics is really helpful as well. That he's never belligerent. He's never, looking down or condescending with his arguments. At least that's the way I read them. I sense Lewis as a very gentle spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually comes through in the way that he argues for Christian truths in Mere Christianity. Mm-hmm. And of course, I could be reasoned with that maybe that's not how he was or is. So I'd put Mere Christianity up there with one of his classic works of apologetics.
It's like a month ago, it was a long time ago, like 2 years ago, my mom had this radio theater of C.S. Lewis by Focus on the Family. And it's basically like a dramatized audio story about broadcast talks and how they came into being.
Mm.
And so my kids and I listened to it, and it was fascinating. I don't know how much of it is fictional or how much of it is historical, but just how, because that's where he actually became known, was through the broadcast talks.
Yep.
Before that, he was just a, professor.
Just a Oxford Don.
Yeah, that was it. So it was through those broadcast talks that elevated him to a rather popular scholar and open doors. So anyway, it was a fascinating thing to listen through. And if you're going on like a Christmas vacation or something, it might be something you want to pick up. It's not that long. And focus on the family. Radio theater, C.S. Lewis at War.
Yeah, and there's a handful of things that are coming out in a more dramatized fashion about Lewis and the Inklings. We've mentioned some of them before, specifically on Lewis, on his life, on his conversion. There's some really good things out there, and just to help you kind of learn more about him. But I feel before we go to the last thing about Lewis that we're going to do, and I already mentioned this before, prepare you. Like, what's your favorite quotes or biggest takeaways? Favorite quotes or biggest takeaways. So you don't have to have a quote. You could just say, here's one of my biggest, and you've kind of already mentioned some, so repetition's okay. But while we're here, I thought we would take guesses at what Andy's picks would have been.
Oh boy.
So if you had picked, your number one was
Abolition of Man.
Abolition of Man. And then I picked Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think third overall Andy would have picked? And just because we already know what our picks were, if they can be things that we didn't pick, that's even better.
Yeah.
And I know one for sure, but I'm curious what you think.
I think he would have that hideous strength on the list. That's where you were going to.
I think for sure he would have that hideous strength on here.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have not. If you go all the way back in the annals of Thinklings podcast, there's a really early podcast where I had listened through the Space Trilogy for the first time. And Andy said, once you've listened or read through them 3 times, then we can talk about them. We've never actually had that discussion on the podcast. So forthcoming at some point. But yeah, I think that hideous strength for sure would be on there. I'm curious I think he would pick a Narnia book. I think I don't remember if this was him, but I feel like he would really like the Silver Chair. Because he mentions Puddleglum all the time.
Yeah, Puddleglum, that's what I was thinking.
But I think he would really, if he had to pick one of them, and he couldn't pick The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I think he'd be a Silver Chair guy. But I don't know. Any other books that, which, by the way, listener, it's kind of perfect because I love Out of the Silent Planet. That's my favorite of the Space Trilogy. Tim's favorite is Paralandra, and Andy's favorite, we think, is That Hideous Strength. So it's the perfect trio. And if you think about that long enough, that accentuates our differences as 3 different guys. But anyway, any other books that you think are like honorable mentions?
Surprised by Joy.
Ooh. Yeah, that is a good one. He has some really good poetry as well. That okay. But anyway, okay. So we'll go to the last part of it: favorite quotes or biggest takeaways of C.S. Lewis, and all of this is in one big bundle of trying to convince whoever's listening to this to go and read C.S. Lewis. But what do you think, Tim? Biggest takeaways or favorite quotes?
We make men without chests and expect from them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst.
That's a good one. That's from the first chapter or first essay of The Abolition of Man.
That's right.
In that same chapter, probably the one that I've quoted the most often, the heart should never take the place of the head, but it can and should obey it.
Amen.
And I think that is probably, other than the apologetics and just the imaginative, creative stimulus, probably my biggest takeaway from Lewis is the affections discussion that we've had on abolition. But Any other quotes? Any other takeaways?
Well, I got to look it up. It's going to take a second. You go and do yours.
Okay, I do have another one, and I looked it up right before the podcast because today it is, as we mentioned, November. Well, this isn't November 29th. This is being posted on November 29th. But today is a very cold, wintry day. It even snowed last week.
It's been great. I was walking over here. The sky is nice and crisp. It's one of the beautiful things about winter.
And so here's an extended quote from That Hideous Strength. That is, I think about this every time I get kind of grumpy about snow. Don't you like a rather foggy in a wood in autumn? You'll find we shall be perfectly warm sitting in the car. Jane said she'd never heard of anyone liking fogs before, but she didn't mind trying. All three got in. That's why Camilla and I got married, said Denniston as they drove off. We both like weather. Not this or that kind of weather, but just weather. It's a useful taste if one lives in England. However, did you learn to do that, Mr. Denniston, said Jane. I don't think I should ever learn to like rain and snow. It's the other way around, said Denniston. Everyone begins as a child by liking weather. You learn the art of disliking it as you grow up. Noticed it on a snowy day? The grown-ups are all going about with long faces, but look at the children and the dogs. They know what snow's made for. I'm sure I hated wet days as a child, said Jane. That's because the grown-ups kept you in, said Camilla. Any child loves rain if it's allowed to go out and paddle about in it. And so that's from That Hideous Strength. And I'm not a fan of snow, but I like that little quote there. Kids love snow. It's because it hasn't been beaten out of them yet. But anyway,
my daughter today, she was with me in the bookstore for a little bit. I was walking her back, and she was saying how she is not as excited about snow anymore.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm like, honey, you're not really old enough for that yet. You're supposed to still love it like way too much.
Yep. Anyway.
Okay, so my second one.
You got another one? I don't have any more after that.
Oh, I have two. Okay, so the next one is, I'm just going to read this little section, this little thing. C.S. Lewis communicated the ambiguity between the actual person and the force possessing the person through the satanically indwelt character of Weston in Paralandra. Quote, Ransom did not know whether in the last few hours the spirit which had spoken to him was really Weston's or whether he had been the victim of a ruse. Indeed, it made little difference. There was, no doubt, a confusion of persons in damnation.
And I mean, I feel like we can't.
That's boring, I know. But
I feel like we can't say
was
that
my
in
quote.
Ransom.
That was my next one.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, what? Nothing. That is like it's both hilarious but chilling at the same time.
Yeah.
Because as you slowly realize what's going on there.
Yeah.
Ooh. Again, Lewis does so well. He gets you to think about something that you've probably thought about before, but you're thinking about it in a way you haven't thought about it before. And I think he does that really well with his fiction. He does it similarly well with his nonfiction, but I think he does it really well with some of his fiction. I guess I will mention we've already named the quote or listed it here, but from the Four Loves, the little knots of friends that turn their backs on the world are the ones that really transform it.
Well, that's got to be in there. That's number one. That's like the
it's
overall.
on all of our mugs. It's on our T-shirts.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, and then I guess your last quote was the
Paralandra one.
That's hilarious. And there's a really good soundbite on one of our early podcasts where Andy's doing that as well, which is really fun. But anyway, so there's a whole bunch of stuff about C.S. Lewis, and if you don't like C.S. Lewis, you probably turned this off a long time ago. But if you enjoy listening to us talk about nonsense, which I guess Lewis isn't nonsense, but if you enjoy us kind of just bantering, it's a very different kind of podcast than what we normally do.
It's reminiscing.
Yeah, and it's
Good
enjoying the creativity and the work and the effort of what Lewis has provided for us.
Mhm.
And, even if we can produce one thing like that, a writing or a sermon or podcast, or, if you can have a group of friends that encourages one another to Christ likeness in the same way that he does to us many years after his death, you've made an eternal blessing in someone's life. You've glorified the Lord. And so if you haven't enjoyed that with us, that's okay. But if you do, I encourage you to read good books.
Talk about them with your friends.
There you go. Happy C.S. Lewis Reading Day. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinklings podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, suggestions, or potential topics that you'd like us to discuss, you can contact us through our email, thinklingspodcast@gmail.com. Remember, don't let this conversation end with this podcast. Read good books, talk about them with your friends, and always continue to cultivate your mind. See you next time on the Thinklings podcast. The Thinklings want to remind our listeners that the Thinklings podcast is our personal production. Our conversations, book discussions, and viewpoints may not represent the views of Faith Baptist Bible College and Theological Seminary. Any questions or feedback should be directed to us at the Thinklings podcast.